They're called the Terror for a reason. Even those of us who knew them when they lived have embraced their name. Call them the Builders or the Terror or the Entombed, it's all the same. We know them by their works. And their rage. Rude Lep, Telkan historian, 4283 current era. Seeing a terror fight for what it believes in is awe-inspiring. Seeing it fight for what it holds dear can be frightening. Seeing a terror fight who has nothing left to lose is terrible beyond description. Not even the name, the Terror, encapsulates how horrifying it is. Manted Warrior, Post-Terran / Manted War, 19 Postglassing. The Terror was on his knees, arms limps, the back of his hands on the floor, slumped oddly, head thrown back. Liquid had run down its face from its eyes, a visible sign of distress. It had started by sobbing, then gone to strange noises. When the corner of its mouth had drawn up to reveal all the teeth, it had begun making the noise that rang from every speaker, across every comlink, through every system. Ah-ha-ha-ha-h. It was mixed with sobs, a screaming cry of agony. The door to the Archon's office opened, and the lead biologist hustled in, all 4 eyes wide with fear. They were alive, Shrocker said, his voice sick and filled with horror. What? The Archon asked. The others. They were alive, not dead. The xenobiologists killed them, Shrocker said. He didn't know how he knew, he just knew. They were frozen. There was no way they could have been alive, the head biologist scoffed. The Terror was curling over itself, bringing its arms up, crossed across the chest, hands balling into fists. Shrocker suddenly remembered the dents in the walls. Deep dents into Omni-Alloy 7. Explain that one, the Archon demanded, thrusting an outstretched finger at the 2D monitor. Perhaps it was not frozen, the scientist said. The Terror curled forward, fists clenched, arms across the chest, and began rocking back and forth, head lifted to stare at the dead female and tray where the dead infant were located. Tendrils of purple, white, and blue electricity began to snarl around its legs, down its back. Through the red glow Shrocker could see something else. Madness. It was frozen, Shrocker said. How would you know? The biologist challenged. The scientists on the monitor were thrusting instruments toward the Terror, babbling questions, barking orders. I moved him. He was cold. Frozen like the others, Shrocker said. You made a mistake, the biologist stated. I am sure the senior sergeant knows the difference between warm and cold, the Archon stated coldly. It woke up. It wasn't dead. It was sleeping, Shrocker said. They were sleeping. Hibernating. Hibernation is for lower animals, the biologist scoffed. Besides. What is happening? The Archon interrupted. Where are the electrical discharges coming from? Unknown, the scientist said. The Terror's face was twisted in an emotion that Shrocker was sure was agony. It was making that keening noise, interspersed with he over and over, still rocking back and forth. Its gaze was locked on the female. The Archon reached up and touched his communicator. Enter the room. Contain the specimen. The Archon paused. Use non-lethal compliance if it does not comply to instructions. The door of the lab opened and a half-dozen of the quick threat response team hurried in, dressed in full armor, carrying laser rifles across their backs, stunners in their hands. The Terror's eyes went to the stand that held the tray that the infant was on. The glow got brighter. The electrical threads thickened, began moving faster, more appearing. The Terror straightened up as the QTRT pushed through the scientists. The electricity was snarling up and down its forearms, wreathing its clenched fists, crackling across the exposed teeth. Pull them back, Shrocker whispered. The first of the QTRT got behind the Terror and grabbed its shoulder. He. The noise was still winding out of every speaker. "Stand up. Hand behind your head," the QTRT troops said, their translator turning it to Fallen Confederacy standard language. The Terror stood up slowly. Liquid was still running down its face as it stared at the small body. It closed its eyes. The QRTR troop tapped the Terror hard on the back. "Hands behind your head." A scientist saw what the Terror was looking at and reached out toward the infant. He. The Terror was still making that noise. The Terror let its arms fall to the side, fists starting to unclench. The scientist touched the small body. The QTRT troop grabbed the Terror's wrist. The Terror's eyes opened. The eyes flashed red. It screamed loud across the speakers, the headsets, echoing through the night air around the ship. Shrokyua was staring straight at the screen when it happened. There was a weird wobble around the Terror, like the air had turned to gelatin. The QRTR, the scientists, were all suddenly pushed away from the Terror. Shrokyua saw it in slow motion. The QRTR and scientists were crushed, their armor, their clean suits, pressed against flesh that deformed. Skeletal structures were visible through muscle and flesh before the bones deformed and snapped. Blood began to explode out from pressure cuts. Some managed to change expression, but not by much. In less than a second, the QRTR troopers and all 20-odd scientists were gone, reduced to scraps of flesh and smears of bloody gore on the walls, ceiling, and floor. The omni-alloy. 7 walls seemed to flex away from the Terror. Lights shattered, instruments went flying, empty gurneys and instrument-laden tables were flung away to be crushed against the walls. The bodies of the other Terrors did not so much as quiver. The camera feed went out. What happened?" the biologist said. "What was that?" the Archon asked. "It killed them all," Shrokyua said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're just gone." The Archon rewound it and played it frame by frame. Shrokyua saw the destruction, how it exploded from the Terror's body like a thermobaric charge, how in less than a second every member of the Dominion in the room was reduced to fluid and scraps of flesh dripping off the ceiling or smeared on the walls. The sound echoed through the speakers. He. The Archon began barking orders into his headset, switching through the cameras. That's impossible," the scientist said. How did it?" The Archon made a satisfied noise, and the camera came on to show the Terror moving down a hallway toward a closed bulkhead hatch. The Archon divided the screen into quadrants, showing the Terror, the blast door, the hallway where another quick reaction threat response team was moving into position, and the helmet cam of the leader of the second QRTR team. The Terror moved to the door. "It's a half-ton of Omni-Alloy 7. There's nothing it can do," the scientist said. Shrokyua didn't say anything. The Archon tapped a few icons. Another blast door slid shut behind the Terror, trapping it in a 20-meter length of hallway. The Terror leaned forward, fingers curled into claws, and pushed against the door. Electricity began moving up and down the Terror's legs, across its shoulders, up and down its arms. He. The Terror still had a rictus of agony on its face, liquid still running from its eyes, as it seemed to lean forward, pushing. The view from the QRTR team leader's helmet cam showed the door. It suddenly bowed. It vibrated and groaned. In 2 places the door began to bulge, right where the Terror had its hands on the other side. "It can't do that," the biologist said, his voice quavering. "Lethal force," the Archon snapped. The blast door collapsed with a shriek, to reveal the Terror standing in the hallway, still completely nude, wreathed in tendrils of electrical discharge. The corners of its mouth were still pulled up, displaying nothing but cutting and chewing teeth. Its eyes were almost impossibly wide, still leaking fluid, burning with a bright red glow that eclipsed the pale blue. 2 rifles fired, the laser snapping out, hitting the terror in the chest. A blackened spot appeared in its flesh. The terror screamed, roared, bellowed, whether in fury or pain, Shrokia didn't know. It leveled its fists. It's mad. What can it do to? The scientist started to say. Shrokia suddenly remembered the lines scored into the Omnialloy 7, with the hardened slag right below. Blue and red lightning coursed down the terror's arms, wreathed its fists, and jumped out to rake the QRTR team. Armor melted, shattered by the transfer of energy. Meat exploded as the energy converted the water in the cells, in the body, instantly to steam. The QRTR team didn't even get a chance to scream as the lightning enveloped them, raking over them, ripping at the ceiling, the floor, the walls, tearing long lines in the Omnialloy 7. The view from the helmet cam vanished. The door cam and the hallway cam beyond went dead. The only camera was behind the terror as it started walking forward. He. Shrokia saw the recall float up on his visor. He was to report immediately to the armor and draw weapons and combat armor. I'm being recalled by my commander Archon, Shrokia said. Go, hurry, the Archon snapped. Stop that thing. How? Shrokia wondered as he hustled out of the room. Over every speaker that dreadful, high-pitched sound could be heard. He. He reached the armor in minutes. For more times the speakers roared with a sound of absolute fury and complete loss. Shrokia knew that the terror had killed more of the Dominion. Still that terrible sound could be heard. He. What's going on? Captain Nurpatch asked as Shrokia bent down and tightened the straps on his boots. Terror got loose. It killed a bunch of scientists and at least 2 quick reaction threat response teams. It's killing everyone it comes across, Shrokia said. He turned to the armorer. Do you have any rockets? There was a quick set of 5 booms that shook the floor. What?
No.
I wouldn't issue them to you if I did, the armorer said. It gave a disgusted exhalation and closed the window. How many of them? Nurpatch asked. He winced as there was an explosion outside that made the lights of the armory flash. He. 1, Shrokia said. He grabbed his rifle and checked the charge. He adjusted the intensity, ramping it all the way up despite Dominion regulations limiting the max setting to 30% outside of a combat zone. Just 1? Someone asked. The entire company was grouped up in the armory, checking their weapons. Shrokia grabbed his helmet, plopping it on his head. 1 is more than enough, he said. He fastened the chin strap. It's just 1. We can take it, Nurpatch stated. You didn't see what I saw, Shrokia said. What was? The entire wall of the armory exploded inward, purple and red lightning ripping through the room. Shrapnel howled through the room, driven by the lighting that ripped apart the fall wall, and everything in between. 1 second there was 30 Dominion soldiers in the armor. The next there was just shy of a score intact. The rest had been reduced to steaming hunks of flesh or screaming charred bodies. We gotta run,
Shrokia yelled.
He glanced over and saw the armory wall was gone on the other side. The armorer and his assistant had caught lighting and were laying on the floor, screaming. Nurpatch led the way, jumping out of the hole. Outside was a nightmare. Buildings were burning, vehicles were engulfed in flame, chunks of bodies lay everywhere. Lightning boomed in the heavy clouds, illuminating the compound and the wreckage. Rain poured down, ineffective against the flames consuming buildings, vehicles and bodies without care. The terror stood in the middle of the scientific compound, still naked, still with that horrible expression. A pair of scientists, clad in their clean suits, attempted to run from behind a burning building. The Terror extended one fist, and lightning jumped from its fist to the scientists with a blinding flash. Both scientists exploded into rags of flesh, parts of their skeletons falling to the ground. "How?" Nurpatch stammered. "It just does," Ch.11 snapped. He managed to reach cover, ducking behind a burning armored personnel carrier. He could smell burning flesh. 3 troopers didn't make it, the lightning hitting them. Their armor held well enough that their limbs went skyward when their torsos exploded as the water in their bodies converted to steam. The limbs rained down, a hard covered in burnt fur and charred flesh bouncing off of Ch.11's helmet. There was the roar of turbines, and 3 air-mobile suits came over the wall, swooping toward the Terror. "It's finished now," Nurpatch said. Ch.11 looked around the burning APC, ignoring the flames and the part of a leg he was kneeling on. He. The 3 armors landed. "No, you idiots, stay mobile," Ch.11 yelled. It was too late. The Terror reached out, grabbing a length of duralloy sticking out the ground. It twirled it as the Terror ran forward. Lasers snapped out, but were deflected by the spinning rod. The Terror jumped into the air, switching to a 2-handed grip in the middle of the duralloy bar. Lasers snapped out around it, missing, as the Terror came down in front of the air-mobile power armor suit. At least a foot of the bar extended from the back of the power armor, blood running down it, glowing blue in the dim light, glittering in the flames. He. The Terror pulled the bar free, spinning in place, lashing out with a kick that snapped the leg off at the knee of a second power armor, the plasteel shattering. The Terror drove the bar through the head of the armor and twisted the bar, the head ripping free. It extended the bar, its arm going out to full length. The helmeted head slid off the bar, flying through the air, to come back down and bounce off of Nurpatch's back. The Terror had already thrust the bar through the chest of the last armor with both hands. As Ch.11 watched, the Terror took a half step, lifting the bar, and the power armor up, the armor transfixed on the bar. Lightning flashed as the Terror held that pose for a moment, lighting coursing up and down its legs, across its shoulders. The sound had stopped. "Everyone dies," the Terror suddenly yelled in Dominion standard speech. Everyone dies. It speaks," Avericol said, his voice thick with fear. Look. Nurpatch yelled, pointing at the gate. One of the big robot power armors had strode into the gate. The base had 2, and Ch.11 could see the other one beyond the wall, moving toward the gate. Ch.11 looked back to see the naked Terror running at the robot power armor. "What does it think it's going to do against hyperalloy armor?" Rakjal asked. He was covered in blood and gore that the rain was trying to wash off. Ch.11 didn't answer, just looked around wildly. There was a hole in the wall, a burning vehicle beyond it. Ch.11 tapped Nurpatch, then pointed at the wall. The Terror dodged both lasers, the particle beam, and came in fast, body low, legs powering it forward impossibly fast, the duralloy bar held out, away from the body. Nurpatch looked back at the robot combat armor. The Terror jumped on the front of it, slamming the bar deep into the armor. It reached out with the other hand and began ripping chunks of armor away, lighting coursing up and down the bar, rippling on its arms. Its toes dug into armor like the armor was putty, giving the Terror purchase. "We gotta run," Ch.11 said. Nurpatch nodded as the Terror reached deep inside the power armor and ripped out a handful of cables, each as thick as Nurpatch's fingers, biting through the wires to throw them aside. Ch.11 led the way, running for the forest beyond. The dozen remaining troops followed him as the Terror held onto the shattered armor with one hand and began driving the duralloy bar over and over into the body of the robot combat armor with the other hand. They jumped over the low section of the wall that remained as the robot combat armor gave a shriek of almost living pain and fell over backwards. They ran for the forest as the second robot power armor moved in, throwing a punch at the Terror. "No, you fool," Shrocker thought to himself. The Terror got the bar up and blocked the punch, the force making the Terror slide back, armor shattering under its bare feet. Shrocker plunged into the woods. The others followed. "We gotta run."